All right, kids. Look alive, everybody. We're going on. The Emmys will feature a new award show for TV shows with a lasting impact. So I'm guessing Jimmy Fallon will know when to take a bathroom break. That'd probably be a good time. Hi, everybody. Kenny Webster. Thank you for joining us. It is an afternoon edition of Pursuit of Happiness Radio. A very, I think, a fantastic talk radio guest today. Joining us now in the studio, Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report, the go-to insider newsletter on Texas politics since 1983. Scott is a native Texan. He started his radio gig. He started working in radio at age 16, according to my research. Mm-hmm. You worked at KTRH here in Houston.
Yep.
For those that don't know, because a lot of people follow us on social media, they don't realize that KTRH and KPRC are kind of like Fox News and Fox Business Channel.
Sure.
They've been joined at the hip now for decades. Probably maybe the most important talk radio cluster if in Texas, if not the country, I think, for right-wing talk radio. And you were a big part of it a long time ago before going to Austin.
Going all the way back to 2003 when I worked in Houston. I started at KTRH as one of the reporters. Actually, the first job that I had in Houston was probably basically on par with janitor because I was the overnight anchor, just reading the news. You remember the old Art Bell show,
Of course, Coast to Coast.
And I would do the news during that for Houstonians and for folks on who were listening on WOAI in San Antonio, and then worked my way up to be, and did all that from Houston, and then worked my way up to be, one of the morning reporters on the morning news on KTRH 740, The Big Stick. And at that point, when I was 23, 24 years old, I thought I had reached the pinnacle of my career, and look how far we've come, Kenny.
A lot has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Look, Scott, I am a radio geek.
Absolutely.
You are a radio geek. That late night conspiracy theory talk format.
Yeah.
It's Coast to Coast. What's the other thing? Ground Zero.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how Alex Jones started back in the day, which was, if you look back at the old Alex Jones clips, lizard people, shape-shifting chemtrails, the Illuminati, Bohemian Groves, it's so different than what he's doing now.
Well, and people don't know that a lot of that radio came from the fact that Art Bell, who had hosted that overnight coast-to-coast show for years and years, he started out doing just a traditional telephone talk show, people calling in, talking about politics and stuff like that. And then one night, the story was that one night, he thought he saw a UFO, and he talked about it on the radio. And that kicked all of it off from there.
Because he just saw some weird thing, and it worked. It's weird what... Yeah. It's weird what the audience will react to.
And it depends on what's going on in people's lives when they're listening. The sort of person who listens in the afternoon versus somebody who's listening overnight it's a different kind of person, right? They have a completely different life. And so that's where you could get away with doing a radio show where Art Bell would come on the air and say, this hour we're only talking to people who can make themselves invisible.
Yeah.
and do that for 90 minutes.
You seem like a journalist.
I am a journalist at this point. Although I will say I have no formal training in that. My training in media was to start out as a disc jockey, as you said, in Brenham, Texas, years ago. Started out reading the school lunch menus, during the morning show and, playing George Strait records and stuff like that. At some point, they let me have a full, disc jockey schedule and did that on a big country station there, KTTX 106.
I'm familiar with it.
Brenham Bryan College Station.
That's the real deal. That's real country radio.
And so being a country disc jockey all those years ago, it trained me for dealing with situations where you have to react quickly, right, and to keep momentum going, which of course is what to stay afloat now with social media and to be able to perform and do what journalists have to do now, which is kind of be like, this is the way one of my friends says it. My friend says, you got to kind of be like a Swiss Army knife. You need to have all the tools, and it might not be that you use each one of them every day,
right?
But you need to have them at the ready. So it's easy for me to jump on radio, go on TV, write articles at quorumreport.com, be on social media and all that stuff. I was basically training for it back at 16 years old. And by the way, we did launch our own podcast as well at quorumreport.com. Quorum Report Radio is available because I am a radio geek. You think you're getting out of something, they're going to drag you right back in. For about 10 years, I had a partnership with the Houston Chronicle here in town, and we did a podcast there with them. I created it for them out of thin air because at that time their corporate owners wanted more multimedia products. And at some point I thought, you know what? Quorum Report, we should just have our own. And so we did launch that a few months ago.
All right. So a question for you that was asked to me by one of our listeners. Somebody I mentioned to some people that you were coming in here today.
Yeah.
You were doing a podcast with Houston Chronicle political writer Jeremy Wallace.
Yeah.
Was there anything happen there? Was there a falling out? Or
I would say we have creative differences. He wants to go one way with the show, and I wanted to go a different way. And the other thing is that as editor of Quorum Report, that's my primary responsibility. And a newspaper like the Houston Chronicle, and I really valued the partnership with them. But that's for a broader audience. And at Quorum Report, I should explain this. At the Quorum Report, our audience is mostly political professionals and people who I would call combatants in politics. And what I mean by that, my publisher Harvey Kronberg, who's been there, writing about politics and doing the TV and radio stuff for decades as well. He divides the world into people who are those who are civilians and those who are combatants. The combatants are the lawmakers themselves, the staffers, the lobbyists, the political consultants, people who make a living at politics, whereas there are all those others who, and by the way, anybody can subscribe. We'll take anybody's money.
Right.
But the fact is that we're primarily writing for a really sophisticated audience that I don't have to, do the treetop stuff for them. I can get down into the weeds. And so with the new podcast, I'm going in that direction, really giving the insiders what they need to know. And what I find interesting in the reactions to the show so far is that a broader audience is interested in that also, because they want to know what the inside baseball is all about.
The person who wanted me to ask you what happened with you and Jeremy was a Democrat that I'm friends with.
Oh, really?
And to that point, you and I first met each other. We were both speakers at the 2019 Texas Young Republicans Convention. It was,
in Houston, yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed about you and I have worked in a lot of the same places, but at different times. Like I write for the Houston Chronicle right now for their op-ed section. I'm a contributor. I don't work there, but
that's cool.
You were a contributor. You worked here. You don't work here now. Now I work here. And one of the things I've noticed, just from watching your career over the years from a distance, a lot of liberals think you're a conservative.
Yeah.
A lot of conservatives think you're a liberal.
That's right.
And how do you, what box do you put yourself in?
Well, let me tell you a quick story. I was down in Galveston a few years ago. I was staying at the historic Galvez Hotel, and every once in a while, I will treat myself to a massage.
Previously home to KTRH, if I'm not.
Absolutely.
It was in the basement.
Yeah. Hang on. No,
it was a different radio station.
Hang on. I know what you're talking about. KTRH. One thing that is true about me, you might have noticed this too. I never lose my place. So I'll come right back to that.
Okay.
But with KTRH, originally started as the station that was at the University of Texas, KUT, many years ago in Austin. And during the Great Depression, the university was told by the legislature, you need to find some ways to cut expenses. And back then, radio was unproven, and it wasn't a moneymaker at all. So the University of Texas system sold KTRH to the owners of the Rice Hotel here in Houston.
Come to the Rice Hotel.
And Come to the Rice Hotel was the call letters. KTRH. That's where it comes from.
Right.
So this idea of me being liberal or conservative or whatever, I was getting a massage at the spa at the Galvez Hotel, and I would rather they just do the massage, but sometimes these people want to talk to you, and they're very nice. They're very nice. This woman was very nice, but she said, what do you do for a living is what she's asking me. And I gave her a quick Cliff's Notes version of what I do, having to be one of the people who's always in the middle of all that combat that I was just talking about.
Right.
The Democrats are fighting with each other, and the Republicans fight with each other, and then both parties, fight each other, and I'm always in the middle. And she made a comment that has stuck with me. She goes, well, that must be very lonely. That must feel very lonely to all be in the middle of all that. And in some ways it is. And in some ways it's not, because what the job really is master. And this is harder now than ever.
Right.
I mean, so difficult because people are so quick to be offended about everything, and people
want to be
personally offended about everything.
It's an industry. It's $1 billion industry, Scott.
It's an outrage industry.
Yeah,
right?
it's a lot. It's very profitable.
Right. So yeah, I know. I get it.
Yeah.
In working in talk radio for many years, I was part of all of that as well. And now in covering a lot of that, you have to master the art of not being personally offended by all of these things and staying in constant communication with people who very often get angry with you about things. But I often think about the words of a late state senator from Galveston. It was a Democrat. On Galveston Island, and Galveston coming up a lot here. What's up? What's up, BOIs?
Yeah.
You know what that means, right? BOI?
No.
Born on the island.
Okay, yeah, I've heard it before.
They take
yeah.
it real seriously down there. You know Babes Beach down there on Galveston Island?
Sure.
It's named after, you would think it'd be Beach Babes. It's named after Babe Schwartz, who was a senator from Galveston, a Democrat back in the day, and a fairly liberal Democrat for the time, by the way. He had a saying about how to try to be durable in politics, and I think about that a lot, durability, being able to do this for a long time. He would say you should forgive and remember. Not forgive and forget, but forgive and remember. And what he meant by that is when somebody does you wrong, you should forgive them because that's about you and your peace and how you feel about things. But remember how they acted so you'll know whether you can trust them going forward. And I think when he said that back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a different environment, right? You and I might have a fight maybe once a month or once in a legislative session back then. But now we can have a fight every second of the day.
On Twitter.
Because we're all on Twitter, we're all on Truth Social or whatever it is.
You and I have argued on social media.
It's happened before.
But I like you, Scott. I think you're
same.
a good guy. By the way, it's KILE 1490 was an easy listening station in the basement of Hotel Galvez.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is now a spa. We have to talk about what's going on the campaign trail. I want to talk more about your work in journalism and the media. If you guys are watching us live streaming on the internet right now, don't go anywhere. If you're listening on the radio, we'll be back right after this message from these fantastic sponsors.
According to a new report, exaggerated statements are up by like 1 billion%. And now more of the highest rated show on radio, Kenny Webster's Pursuit of Happiness.
We are hanging out in the studio right now with Scott Braddock, a very controversial journalist, has lived all over the state of Texas, has covered Texas politics. Another question that was asked to me by someone that I told some people you were going to be here today.
Okay.
Somebody asked me in the Jasmine Crockett versus James Tallarico thing.
Yeah, Tallarico.
Tallarico. I'm saying it wrong.
Well, here's the thing. The fact that you say it wrong tells you a lot about the race because most people are just learning about him, and so most people say it wrong.
Tallarico.
Yeah.
Not Tallarico.
Right.
Tallarico. Is it Hispanic?
No.
Italian?
White guy.
It's just a white guy.
Just a white guy from Williamson County.
I
from
feel
Austin.
like I have to do Latin vowels, but Scott, I barely speak English.
Yeah, I've heard it the way you said it. I've heard people say Tallarico. People are trying to figure out how to say it, but it does speak to something that's fundamental about the race, which is that his name ID is still low, so people are just learning about him, even though he is famous on Instagram.
What you were right before we went to break there, you were talking about how because of what you do for a living, there are people that don't like you.
That's right.
Or they feel like you're in the middle of all these feuds and stuff like that. Yeah. I have a confession, Scott. I'm a middle-aged, aging punk rocker. One of my favorite things.
You didn't have to confess. I figured that out.
You figured it out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things about doing this for being a liberty, conservative, right-wing liberty guy, I love when people are mad at me. People I don't know are mad at me because I don't want to go to war in a country I can't pronounce the name of, or I think it's great.
I try to keep it in perspective, and here's the way I think about it: as an old radio hand, as somebody who did it for a long time, and now we're all in the middle of all these controversies all the time on social media and in other venues as well. Rush Limbaugh used to talk about this. That's somebody that formative for me. Growing up listening to Limbaugh, and at the time he was on Dan Patrick's station. Here in Houston. Eventually moved over to KTRH later. But Limbaugh would talk about the fact that for talk radio, you would maybe have, and this is probably still true, right? That you would probably top out at about 2 or 3% of the audience are the ones who would ever actually call in, right? The vast majority of people are just listening, and the numbers may be a little bit different now, but the way I think about it is that in doing what I do, I'm doing it for the 97% of people who are not calling, and I think about the comment section online as the same folks, the people who would be fired up, amped up, don't really know that much about what we're talking about. I choose to engage with people who I know that they know what they're talking about, and I sleep a lot better at night that way.
Scott, it's a common mistake in the media. What you've just described is people will often hyper-focus on this tiny portion. And talk radio guys do it, journalists do it.
I've worked at a news station, I will say, without saying which one, I worked at a news station where the news director was so obsessed with being reactive to the people who were calling in, or at that time, get this, even sometimes writing a letter, like an old school, like now you would just throw that in the trash because you'd think it must have poison in it or something.
Right.
But
100%.
But people calling the station, complaining about whatever. And this boss that I had was just obsessed with reacting to that. And I kept reminding him that's not the audience. That's one person. Now, I would say, in fairness, that some of the people who comment do reflect the thoughts of some of the other people who are just listening. I know that that's true. One of the things and a luxury that I have in doing what I do is I'm constantly in contact with the core of my audience, which is the Quorum Report audience. It's political professionals at the Capitol. I'm responsible to them because I see them all the time. You know, it's kind of like being the guy who's in charge of a small town newspaper. When I walk through the Capitol, most of those people are our readers at quorumreport.com. And so when I see lawmakers, when I see their staff, when I see lobby folks, those are the folks who don't text me or write to me immediately because they might have been upset about something, but they'll stop me in person to talk to me about the issue. And what's so cool about it is that then they'll tell me something I didn't know, and I get to learn things. And to your point, maybe I might have pissed somebody off, but I'm always going to have that conversation with them because, look, I don't know everything. I'm here to learn.
That's what journalism is.
My training in journalism is learning how to do it for the last 25 years.
There is a massive media industry in Texas.
Yeah.
We are our own country.
Sure.
Not every state can say this.
Oh, believe me, I've traveled the whole thing multiple times, and I'll give you an example on that. Last year, when Governor Abbott and the Attorney General, Paxton was on his retribution tour after the impeachment, right, going after some House Republicans. Governor Abbott was trying to push the school voucher thing, and he was going after Republicans. So I had to travel to all of the districts where those guys were personally appearing and attacking other Republicans. And it is no doubt, in my mind, it is probably like parts of Russia.
Yeah.
Because there were many events, be deep East Texas or West Texas, where I'd be the only journalist there. And I had to travel hundreds of miles to get there. It's really, and if you don't have an independent journalist on the scene for something, what happens in Russia is the government just says what happened, and that's what people are either forced to believe or not believe.
It's just as true with state-funded media as it is with corporate-funded media.
In some ways.
I mean, exactly. It's a different kind of bias, right? One of the things I like about you is you will put just the facts first, but you're also not afraid to tell your audience what you think.
Yeah.
There are journalists, I have friends that work at major news outlets around the state who pretend to be non-biased.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as non-biased. We all have biases.
I think there's a role for all types of journalists. I think that there should be those who only present the facts and that's it, and then there should also be commentators, and then there can also be a blend. It's the kind of stuff that I do. But I do think this, and I agree with one of my mentors in journalism who said, and it goes right to what you're saying. He said, look, when you write a story and you put it out there into the world, or you put it on TV, on the radio, or whatever it is, if you try to tell your audience or convince them that you don't have any opinion about that, they're not going to believe you. They're going to think that you must have some opinion about it, and that's a more honest exchange of information if you know where I'm coming from, right? And instead of me trying to hide it. But to your point about corporate media, here's the thing, and no, people don't really understand this on a fundamental level. There was a time when towns like Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, all across the United States, all of these cities had at least two newspapers, and one of them was the Republican paper,
right,
and one was the Democratic paper. And you know how we ended up with news stories in the paper that are supposed to supposedly just tell you both sides, and then you figure out who's right?
Yeah.
That's the format they do now.
You're supposed to decide, yeah.
Well, it's because of media consolidation. One of the papers, went out of business, and it previously was the case that the Republican paper would attract a certain kind of advertiser, and the Democratic paper would have different advertisers, right? But once there was only one paper, then they were trying, for that one paper, they're trying to attract all the advertisers in town. So they would go tell their reporters, hey, don't take sides in these stories because we're trying to get as much money in here as we can. Point being, for good or bad, it was a business decision. It wasn't about journalism ethics.
In the 1920s, my great-great-grandfather was a U.S. Marshal who died in a gunfight in Memphis with a bootlegger. And there were two newspapers in town. And I'm sure you see where this is going.
Yeah.
One of them wrote a very flattering article about the bootlegger. The other wrote a very flattering article about the U.S. Marshal.
And those were the two sides to that story, apparently.
Right, exactly. Well, that was it.
Incredible.
One of them made it sound like this guy was Robin Hood. The other made it sound like he was Jeffrey Dahmer. It just depended on who you ask.
Yeah.
Was the Quorum Report the first independent political news outlet in Texas that you know of?
Well, I mean, the Texas Observer is out there, and there are other non-corporate owned entities that are there. I can say that we were the first publication in Texas to go online on the internet, and that was in 1998. And the reason for that, get this, is because, at that time, you're still dealing most of all completely with, dial-up internet. You remember this, but some of your listeners may not. People would have to, nobody could call anybody for a little while because somebody's going to browse the internet for a little while because they're using the phone line in the house kind of thing back in the day. But at the Texas Capitol, a state representative named Robert Eccles, who was also later the Harris County judge, he made it a big push to say that all of the legislators at the Capitol should have internet in their offices. And at that time, it was sort of controversial because people wondered, why would you spend money on that? At that time, people thought the internet was a fad and that wasn't going to be around. And
isn't that amazing?
It is.
Color TV, that's not going to make it.
My boss, he had the vision, and he saw that opportunity as a business opportunity when they said, okay, we're going to basically connect the Capitol to the World Wide Web. Well, he said, look, there should be a news service that serves that audience. And so that's how we came to be online way back then. And back then it was, I know the stories. I wasn't there for this part, but it was sort of like a community cork board at that time, a website where my boss would post something, and back in those days, you would post something online, and then you would immediately call someone who's somewhere else and say, hey, can you see it?
Right.
We would never do that now, but back then it was like using, telegraph.
It was a very different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got all these independent news outlets,
Sure.
and they're very open about their political biases.
Yep.
Besides a network of talk radio, right-leaning talk radio stations
Yep.
across the country, now you've got Dallas Express News.
Yeah.
Have you checked them out?
I've seen that, funded by Monty Bennett, I believe, who's one of the billionaires up there in Dallas. And they, they've broken some stories. You've got Current Revolt based up in Dallas as well.
Tony Ortiz.
They've broken some stories.
Thoughts on him?
Yeah, Tony Ortiz, I think, from everything I know, an honest broker, somebody's trying to get it right, which I could say that about myself, too.
You hope so, right?
Yeah. And, I think, not about Tony or the Dallas Express specifically on this, but I do think in American history and world history, some of the absolute best journalism has been done by people who were absolutely open about their point of view in the world, right? And that's also true for those who don't do that, who don't share their opinions as freely. But it's very often that someone who is motivated either by ideology or something else, or they're motivated by their belief system. And by the way, it's okay for your belief system as a journalist to just be, this is what I tell journalism students all the time, you can also just be motivated by wanting the world to be a better place, and whatever ideology you put that under. I tell these kids, if you are not doing journalism to make the world a better place, then do something else.
Yeah, leave it better when you got than when you got.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things I find,
your job isn't to be a stenographer.
When I meet journalists from the Texas Tribune or the Houston Chronicle, and we're in a pleasant setting at a cocktail bar after a political convention,
Yeah.
I do find that most of the time, and I know some of my audience will disagree with this, but I'll still say it, most of them have good intentions.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but certainly most of them do. Even if they don't believe in my politics, usually we want what's best.
I will say that when I would hear all of the conspiracy theories about, the liberal media, everybody walking in lockstep and all of that, I would tell folks, I've worked in so many newsrooms where everyone who works there cannot even agree on what to get for lunch.
Yeah.
And so no, I don't think it's some big conspiracy.
They can't agree, right?
I do think in mainstream media it is true at certain publications for sure that the person who ends up attracted to that job is somebody attracted to that kind of work is a younger person who maybe skews a little bit more liberal.
Yeah, but that's more of a product of the generation.
In some ways, I think so. But I would say what's probably more problematic in journalism is young people who don't come from an economically diverse background. Most of the kids who go to journalism school come from a wealthy family, and they don't have the kind of experience that I have, which is growing up working poor on a family farm in Wharton County, Texas. And I think there's a place for all of that, and there probably has to be more work done to try to diversify that.
Scott, I wanted to hate the Houston Chronicle. I used to dog on
You wanted
them.
to hate them? Yeah.
I wanted to. I mean, it's Hearst Media. They invented yellow journalism. They're famous for that. And then
Dan Patrick used to have a website in town called Chronically Biased.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
We
Yeah.
used to call it the Houston Comical.
Yeah.
And then Evan Mintz took over the opinion section.
Evan's a good friend. Yeah.
And he told me I could write anything I wanted as long as I'm not lying. If I can back up my points with facts, he would publish it.
Yeah.
And now, over the past few months, he's published
There you
several
are
of
in
my
the
articles.
paper. Yeah.
So how can I be mad at the Houston Chronicle if they're expressing my opinions in their newspaper?
I've
Now,
had so many conversations lately about how, because of the way people interact online, the conversation stops because people have some bad interaction on Twitter or wherever it is. It's usually on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now. And I got to tell you, that to me, that's a great story because it means that y'all actually talked about it. You had a real conversation, and it wasn't just a back and forth online. And one of the key points I would make about durability in politics and public life right now is that if the conversation starts online, that's fine.
right.
But if it ends there, that's the problem.
Interesting. That's a very interesting point. You, so Quorum Report's out there covering the Capitol. Another news outlet covering the Capitol is Michael Quinn Sullivan and Brandon Walton's Texas Scorecard. Any thoughts on them?
Yes, I do have thoughts on them. They've been funded by one of the guys who's been working to, and I'll just add, we'll see how this goes over with the audience, but
Okay.
Tim Dunn, who has funded their operations for many years out of Midland. He's a billionaire oil guy from out there.
Sure.
And he has done, I would say this to his credit. I met him once. I talked to him one time. I walked up to him in the lobby of a hotel in Austin where he was visiting with some folks, and he was talking. He was having a conversation. I didn't want to interrupt with a big spiel of my own, but I did thank him for doing what he does because it's very good for my business because I have to clean up a lot of the stuff that they put out. I do think that they're not engaged in the same kind of honest journalism that someone like Tony Ortiz at Current Revolt is, and what I mean by that is that they start with an idea in mind of what they're going to write, and they work backward to get to that conclusion in a way that these other publications don't. And I think that's because they're taking orders from their funders in a way that other media just do not. And I don't see you doing that or some of these others.
I can't confirm or I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but I know that for conservatives, at least here in Southeast Texas,
A lot of people read it, yeah.
there are stories that we all see on social media. We all see it's happening, and then no one will cover the story except for Brandon Waltons or one of these guys. And I think for news consumers, especially for talk radio guys, it's very frustrating because we see something happen, and then they're the only ones that run the story.
Right, and I would say that one of the things that I hear all the time from my audience over the years, this is my distillation of the commentary about bias in media.
Sure,
is right to your point. Is that the greatest media bias is in your story selection. Right? What things do you actually choose to cover, right? I mean, the New York Times, Washington Post, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, a lot of those, even though they come from different places ideologically, throwing Fox in there and OANN and Newsmax and some of the others, they're still covering basically the same stories at that level, but they're just covering them in different ways, right?
From a different angle, from a different perspective.
What we see in Texas is the newspaper will cover this, and some of these conservatives' websites might cover this or that. I do think that when here's a tell on whether the stories end up being legit is whether mainstream media ends up picking it up in some form. So I'll give you an example. On Current Revolt, you may have seen where they broke the story and they were aggressive about the story. Tony Ortiz was about the staffer for Congressman Gonzalez down in San Antonio.
Yeah,
who
committing
set herself on fire.
Self-immolation.
Unbelievable.
It's a hard story to believe.
Let me say it. So some of the other media in San Antonio in that area pick up on the story. They had the Express News ended up covering it, and my friends at KSAT 12 Television in San Antonio covered it. But they have a different vetting process for the information that they're going to use. So let me pull back a little bit. It is very often that there are stories that I believe are of consequence. I'm the editor after all. There are very often stories that appear in Quorum Report and nowhere else. There's often times, though, that we break a story and then other media will pick that up.
They report on your reporting.
And or they try to report it out themselves is another way to say it.
They don't give credit?
Not much.
I hate that.
Well, my publisher years ago, he started back when the print deadline was still a thing. When Dallas Morning News or the Houston Chronicle absolutely had to have a story by a certain time to have it in the physical newspaper the next day.
Sure.
My boss, he actually started publishing what he had as an exclusive story. He would wait till after the print deadline so that they couldn't do that, so that they couldn't just take credit for his story. But there's very often times that because of the way we source our stories that we can break something before they can. So, for example, there may be something happening at the Capitol. Maybe some piece of legislation is moving, or I hear that the governor's going to do something, and I can't necessarily quote my source on it, but I can say that sources that are close to the governor or sources that are Abbott adjacent. I might say some people who are hearing about what he's about to do, I can go ahead and report that out based on that kind of sourcing, where the newspaper might not be able to do that. And then once there's more verification, they would pick it up. So there are different ways in which those stories can come out.
Yeah. I think you explained that very clearly. We're going to go back on the radio right now. This portion of the interview has just been for the podcast and the live stream. We're going to get back on the air right now. I want to talk about the primaries, so stand by. If you guys are watching us live streaming on the internet, don't go anywhere. We'll return in seconds right now. All right. This just in, a North Dakota woman received a letter 72 years after it was sent. North Dakota, a state with so little going on that late mail makes the headlines, Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report.
Yeah.
Scott, you are out on the campaign right now, trail right now.
Yep.
I already forgot how to pronounce James's last name. Not Tallarico. Tallarico.
Tallarico.
James Tallarico and Jasmine Crockett. It seems like James is the safer choice for Democrat primary voters in the general election. You've got Jasmine Crockett going viral for calling Texas racist.
Yeah, I saw that.
I feel like she's auditioning for a job on The View. Does she want to be a senator?
I think she does want to be a senator. I don't think that either of them is going to be a senator because this is still a Republican state, and I can talk more about why I think the general election will go the way that I think it will. What I would say about,
I definitely want to talk about that.
Yeah, what I think on Tallarico is that that's a good way to put it, is maybe the, quote, safer choice, because for Tallarico, he's able to probably put together the kind of multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational coalition that a Democrat has to have to even be competitive in a general election in Texas. So what do I mean by that? Look, you've got all these different groups, African-American voters, Hispanic voters. You've got a lot of white liberal women and a few white men that come together to elect Democrats, either nationwide or statewide, potentially.
Sure, that's
Texas.
how it works, yeah.
Right. For Republicans, they can basically get there, not all, but can basically get there with old white people. That's essentially
in a primary.
Well, in the general too, the average voter in Texas.
They say that changed this election.
So the average voter in Texas, in this state, for a Republican, is 65.
Okay.
For a Democrat's 48.
Interesting.
Right? So it's still not the youngins.
We're talking
they haven't
just
figured
Texas.
That out. That's just Texas.
Because they say young men are skewing more conservative than ever since the beginning of us skewing and polling that.
They're just still not voting very much. That's the problem.
Isn't
right?
that interesting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know why? I mean, you think about the fact that I'll give you the example of sports betting on your phone.
Okay.
So the lieutenant governor, as I call him lovingly, Little Governor Patrick.
You and I don't agree on everything. We may not agree on ICE and school choice, but we definitely don't like Dan Patrick.
I know you're not thrilled with him. Well, his position on sports betting, apparently, and this was from my sourcing, that he had a meeting with some of these folks, and Jerry Jones, I think, was present for this, if I remember right. This was a couple of years ago.
Right.
Patrick told some of those folks who want to legalize sports betting that that he had no problem with it as long as it was only done at retail locations that would be inside the sports stadiums or maybe somewhere else, like at a convenience store or something like that. But he didn't. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, out of his jacket pocket. He showed them the phone. He says, "But I don't want it to be online. I don't want kids to be able to do that on their phones." Well, the young people, they want to do everything on their phones, right? And that's where the real money is for the sports betting thing. But the fact is that when it comes to the younger voters, you start talking to them about, oh, you have to register to vote all these months in advance, and you got to do everything on paper and do stuff through the mail. They don't want to do it. The first question is, can I do this on my phone? And as soon as the answer is no, they're probably done with it for the most part.
Have you ever heard this, that 90% of the internet is the dark web? Like you and I are on,
normal web.
Wall Street Journal. You and I are on
right. Yeah. I'm not on the dark web.
Fidelity's Bank or Chase Bank or wherever you bank. The dark web is most of the internet, we're told.
Right.
It's like most of the internet is people buying and selling things illegally, downloading software without a license, streaming sporting events without paying for them.
Yeah.
That's most, we're told. I don't know if that's
and
true.
all kinds of things you don't even want to mention on the radio.
Of course.
Sure.
Well,
right.
we get that. Yeah. Hopefully the FBI goes after them instead of censoring journalists. And
that
we
would
hope
be cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. I would agree.
That'd be better. Yeah.
There's an article in the Tribune today, the Texas Tribune, from Alejandro Serrano. Maybe you don't know who he is.
Good reporter.
The headline had an interesting question. Why lieutenant governors endorsed candidates always win? Why do they always win?
Well, first of all, he has mastered the election of consequence in Texas, which is the Republican primary. I say this all the time. The Texas GOP primary is the most consequential election on earth that almost no one votes in. What I mean by that is here we have a state of 31 million people spread across 254 counties and 2 time zones. And you know how many people vote in a Republican primary, which sets the tone for the state?
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, you're close. It might top out at 2 million, usually 1.5 million, something like that.
Okay,
so,
in the primary. Okay, so
yeah.
it is more. Yeah.
So
yeah.
put it this way. What's half of 1.5 million? You're talking about 750 to 800,000 Texans decide the fate of this state all the time, because the Democrats don't put up a fight in November generally, and they don't at all. The minority party does not at all set the tone for what policies are going to be implemented by state government. Patrick understands this in a way that I think no one else does at the state politics level, and how to influence the primary electorate, what things they care about. Nobody does more polling than he does, as far as not just issue sets, but campaigns as well. He always knows exactly how those races are going to go before he even gets involved with them, usually. And I would also say this. He's so poll-driven. I'll give you an anecdote. When they are working on legislation at the Texas Capitol, in the back of the Texas Senate, there's a room back there that's just their lounge. They can chill and have some coffee, get something to eat before they go back onto the Senate floor.
Right.
They can watch TV, watch Fox, watch MSNBC if it's the Democrat senators, whatever. They can sit back there and relax. Well, Patrick will walk through the lounge with printouts of polls that he's had his campaign do these polls, and the polls are specifically about the legislation they're about to vote on the floor of the Senate.
It's very convincing.
And he'll hand it to the senators and just say, hey, just trying to be helpful. Just want you to know what's going on. It's individualized to their districts. Those polls are.
This is what your people want.
This is what your people want. You need to do it.
And of course, he's cherry picking the pollsters, I'm guessing.
Well, no. I mean, only in the case of, I believe, as far as I know, the only issue where a version of what you just said happened was on THC this past year.
Yeah, right.
Where even his own pollster had found that Republican voters didn't like what he was trying to do.
And Abbott must have known that.
Absolutely. But
and Trump must have known that.
Yes, but then after that, we got a poll from the same pollster that basically showed that, hey, well, if you know that it would kill everybody, then would you be for?
If you thought it would, if we inserted a variable that isn't even true. All right, well then on that point,
he plays the golf course better than anybody else. I would say, if you think about politics as a golf course. And you can't blame somebody for being the best player, right? He always hits the ball right to the green and almost a hole in one most of the time. But I would say that's not really leading, right? That's not being a leader. That's just trying to, put your finger in the wind, figure out where people are at, and go do what they want. He does that. Dan Patrick, when he was first running for the Texas Senate back in 2006, I know the folks who worked on his campaign, so I know this for a fact. He was so good, not because he was a good talker, which he is, but he's a better listener. He would sit with precinct chairs all over Senate District 7, out Northwest Harris County. That's Paul Betancourt now. He would sit with the precinct chairs, the most active voters, and he would just sit one-on-one with them and listen to what their concerns were. And he got 2 things out of that. And as soon as the meeting was over, by the way, he'd slip them a business card. That's my cell phone number. Call me anytime. 2 things he got out of that. One is that he heard their concerns, so he knew what to then talk about.
Right.
He could mirror what they were talking about. And 2, of course, those voters would turn around and they would tell all their Republican friends, oh, he actually listened to me. He's going to do what he said he was going to do. It was the perfect interaction.
Here's my question. We only have a couple minutes left
Yeah.
here. I'd love to ask you about Harris County. Is Rodney Ellis the Dan Patrick of Harris County?
Well, he does know what he's doing. And operates in similar fashion, right? You have seen, and I'm in Austin, so I'm not watching county government as much, but I do know former Senator Ellis, who's now Commissioner Ellis,
right?
And he does absolutely operate masterfully. And you could tell, I could tell from afar, even watching from Austin, where he started out with an alliance with Judge Hidalgo, Lena Hidalgo, and eventually, as she got more and more, I'll just say, off the reservation, she couldn't count on even Ellis anymore to back her up in those commissioners' court meetings. The votes were starting to go 4-1 instead of 2 and 3, right? And she started calling some of those commissioners, even though even the Democrats who she didn't agree with, she called them the GOP 3. But now
the latest, yeah.
Now she's got like a GOP 4 because Ellis votes against her all the time too.
It's hard to believe that Anise Parker is not liberal enough for Lena Hidalgo. I mean, I expect Lena to not get along with Marty Langton or Tom Ramsey.
Right.
But now she doesn't get along with Anise Parker. She doesn't want Anise Parker to get her job.
I'm going to watch that county judge's race very closely. I think it'll be one of the most interesting contests in the state with Marty Langton, who I know, and former Mayor Parker I know as well. She's, I think she's pushing 70, if she's not 70 already. Marty, of course, more middle-aged guy who comes from a union background, is president of the firefighters union and all that.
And running as a Republican.
Running as a Republican.
Not traditionally what you expect from someone with that kind of background.
Running as a Republican, and with the backing of Governor Abbott, who's got the endorsement, and Abbott has said he's going to spend $25 million in Harris County, targeting some Texas House Democrats. Now, I don't think this is a sleight of hand. I don't think the real goal of Abbott is to beat Texas House Democrats in Houston. That's probably not going to happen, except for maybe one, where Trump actually won the district down in Pasadena area.
I'd wondered the same thing, yeah.
But it's more about boosting overall Republican turnout across the state. There's a lot of Republican votes in this area. Harris County, I go back and check the numbers, but I believe Houston-Harris County is still about 1/5 of the electorate all across the state. So the Republicans can't write it off any more than the Democrats can. And if the Democrats take the county judge race for granted here, for example, and they say, oh, no, this is a Democratic area now, Republicans can't win, I would remind them that that's what they used to say about the Rio Grande Valley, and that's not true anymore.
One more question on that note, because that is very interesting. Right, exactly. The border was always supposed to be for the Democrats. We're now halfway through the second term of Trump.
Yeah.
And as you remember better than anyone, or as well as halfway through his first term, Beto versus Ted, and that's how we got Lena.
Right.
Everybody thinks history repeats itself. Everybody that here in Harris County, Houston, Texas politics thinks, oh, the outrage over Trump's going to be great for Democrats in big cities. Do you believe it?
I think that for the most part that's correct. I do think that Republicans learned some lessons from that in 2018. I know, based on my reporting, that little Governor Patrick was slack-jawed in his chair in his hotel room that night on election night, when he came just 2 or 3 points away from losing a statewide race, just like Senator Cruz came that close to losing as well. And this is it. I mean, I do expect backlash to the Republican Party here and everywhere, but I would say in Texas, Republicans have built the kind of fortress essentially through their, through a well thought out structural advantage plan that they've put into place, and that includes a huge amount of money that they will have, but also the kind of infrastructure they've been building in places like the Valley. Look, if you think about the fact that the Democratic Party is getting is really racking up these big gains in the suburbs in places like Fort Bend County and Denton County, Collin County, Williamson County, Hayes County, et cetera. You think about it like two cars that are about to pass on the roadway going in different directions, where you have the Republicans going this way, Democrats going this way. And in the suburbs, they're eventually going to pass each other, and the Democrats will be in the majority in most of those places. So if that's true, Republicans have to think about where else they can get votes, right? So that's why over the last decade, Governor Abbott's been putting so much money into the Valley. He has been really working on Republican infrastructure down there. When you saw those stories about how Trump flipped the Valley in that last election, that he won some of those counties down there.
Do you think it was really Greg?
He sort of did. But a lot of work was done prior to that for it to happen. Of all the entities that were doing work to elect Republicans in the Valley, none of them were Donald Trump for America. It was Greg Abbott, other organizations that work to elect Republicans have been doing that. And it's just a function of getting out there and talking to people about what their real values are. The same thing was true not that long ago in Deep East Texas, where folks were voting for Democrats until, just a couple decades ago, and that stopped. But it didn't happen on its own. Republicans had to go out there and run those campaigns and do the work.
My guest for the past almost an hour here at this point, Scott Braddock. The website is The Quorum Report. I know our listeners may not always agree with his opinions, but if you're interested in what is going on in Austin or throughout the state of Texas, Scott is a guy you cannot ignore. Check out his website. Follow him on X. I thank you for your time this afternoon, my brother.
Thank you. It's always fun to learn from each other.
Hey, my man, we'll be back bright and early tomorrow morning for more of what you bought a radio for.
You are listening to the Pursuit of Happiness Radio. Tell the government to kiss your ass when you listen to the show.